Really excited to have you all on deck for our presentation today. We thought we would kick it off with a quick poll just to get a sense of where you're joining us from and what your role is. Hopefully that can help us think about how the content is most applicable to you in your region and your location. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, would you just add your role and the location you're joining us from today? And we'll give you just a couple minutes to do that. It seems from some folks from Minnesota, Miami, University of Florida, Iowa, Southeast, Georgia, Colorado, Virginia, Kansas City, Missouri, Utah. Looks like a variety of folks on, from post-secondary ed to folks working in districts, schools. Fantastic. Lots of great representation today. So while you're all still adding those to the chat, thank you so much for doing that. That really helps us kind of couch our thinking with respect to where you're coming from and the role that you play in the education space. So I'll just introduce our webinar for today. My name again is Josh Stewart. I'm a senior researcher here at Mathematica, and I lead our Mitigating Teacher Shortages Partnership in Wyoming, which is really kind of focused on teacher apprenticeship programs, helping think about the piloting in these first couple of years where Wyoming is spearheading some really interesting programs related to teacher apprenticeships. Although for today's discussion, we really wanted to provide an overview and context on diversifying the teacher workforce. And so we wanted to share some context as well as provide some evidence-based strategies that can support diversity in the teacher workforce. And we'll touch on specifically 4 stages of the educator pipeline, which build off of the prior REL infographic. I'll get into that in the next slide, but that just helps kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about today. We have 4 sections that'll touch on each component of that pipeline. And then we wanted to build in some Q&A at the end, so you'll get a chance to interact with the panelists, pose your discussion questions. And so we'd love to hear from you and the questions you might have about the work we're going to talk about today. So please note that that'll come towards the end, and we will be monitoring the chat along the way and hopefully cataloging the questions as we go. So as I mentioned, this kind of builds off of an infographic we developed last year. And this infographic, Diversifying the Teacher Workforce, Promising Strategies from the Regional Educational Laboratories and the Comprehensive Centers. This really helps outline some promising practice and evidence-based strategies that span the educator workforce pipeline, from recruitment to preparation of candidates, to hiring, to supporting those individuals to be retained in their positions once they've been hired. And so each of the REL presenters today will talk about each one of these pipeline components. And so I think we have a great mix of projects across the United States that really help touch on the pipeline here. So today, just a quick overview of our presenters. I'll be kind of teeing off between sections related to where individuals pipe in, but we're really grateful today to have a really deep bench of experts across the REL region, or across multiple REL regions, I should say. Tara Lampkin and Tony Lachter from REL Southeast, Jackie Peng from REL Mid-Atlantic, Emma Espel Berial from REL Central, and also Tammy Kazi Tone from REL Midwest. And so these are our presenters for today. They'll each have a chance to talk to you about some of the important work they're doing in their region. And we're so grateful that they could all join us today to talk about their projects. So why don't I pass it off to our first presenters. This is going to be Latera Lampkin from REL Southeast, and she's joined by Tony Lachter from Jackson State University. So Latera, Tony, please take it away.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. I am Latera Lampkin from Regional Education Laboratory Southeast, and my co-presenter today, as noted, is Dr. Tony Latiker from Jackson State University. But before we begin, I'd like to say it certainly takes a village to do the work that we're doing. And so first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge my director, Nicole Patton-Terry, as well as our IES lead, Janelle Sands, and our research team, Yichi Newton, Stephanie Brown, and we have some amazing GRAs, Alexandra, Denara, as well as Leah Register, that's with us today on the session. And most importantly, all of our HBCU partners have been a part of this work since 2017. And so as you'll hear today, addressing teacher shortages requires not only increasing the number of teachers, but also fostering a workforce reflective of our student population. So educator recruitment and retention efforts really does require sustained efforts across states, districts, and institutional initiatives. So to tackle these issues, Rel Southeast launched the Diversifying the Teacher Pipeline with HBCU's partnerships, building on the historical role of HBCUs in preparing culturally responsive educators. The partnership seeks to address critical barriers to recruitment and retention, aiming to strengthen the teacher pipeline and to contribute to reducing the diversity gap in educator workforce. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our partnership really is to work with the HBCUs, the Mississippi Department of Education, and districts in Mississippi through targeted technical and research support activities to inform pre-service and in-service initiatives, with a particular focus in supporting the development and implementation of evidence-based strategies that enhance recruitment efforts and foster retention, ultimately contributing to a more diverse and sustainable educator workforce, in this context, Mississippi. So our core partners are Jackson State University, Tougaloo College, Mississippi Department of Education, and the Vicksburg Warren School District. We also have what we call affiliate partners who are very critical to the work that we do, which are Florida A&M University. And I noted that we have those Mississippi HBCU Research Consortium. These are HBCUs who've been a part of our work since 2017, as well as the National Institutes for Historically Underserved Students, who has been critical in terms of the coordination of the work that we do as partners. So our ultimate goal is to work with our partners at these levels to really promote collaboration and coordination to increase the understanding of the needs, resources, and the strategies to support our HBCUs and further increasing student enrollment and completion. Again, the goal is to enhance the teacher pipeline and to diversify the educator workforce. And so our very first initiative and project has been our Teacher Pipeline Initiatives and Data Use Project. At the request of our partners, there really was an interest in understanding better alignment of the teacher pipeline initiatives at the state, the district, and the institutional levels. And this was really critical for us to help to understand and to streamline strategies for transitioning candidates into the teaching workforce throughout the pipeline. And so our first session really involved state and district administrators, along with JSU State, Jackson State University, and our other HBCU partners, to really do an initiative crosswalk. And what that is, what you see before you is the template that we really use to really sit down and talk about what's really happening at each level. From that initiative, we found that, of course, there was some alignment in terms of strategies and initiatives, but we also found that there were some gaps. And so that process really served as the foundation and prompted the work for us to understand what was happening at the district level, the state level, and the institutional level. So, for example, in that process and the discussion, we found that the state, MDE, as well as some of the districts were really working hard on some recruitment efforts, but there was not as much partnership with the institutions. From those discussions, we talked more about how do we make sure that those initiatives are in fact aligned to do that work and to streamline both teacher preparation and recruitment certification, reinforcing recruitment as a shared priority. A second component of this work, in which I really get very, very excited about, is we also have, in addition to what we call systems capacity building, we have institutional capacity building. And so this project and this component is really designed to engage and increase the capacity to conduct research at the institutional level, with a particular focus on our junior faculty at our institutions. And as you will hear later from our co-presenter, Dr. Latiker, that these sessions really enabled JSU faculty to first assess where they were in terms of research, so really understand what are our needs and how might we improve upon those needs, but also to have them think and have a deeper understanding about how does our institutional initiatives actually align with the state's initiatives and the broader landscape of education and teacher recruitment and preparation across the state and nationally. And so what have we learned? Our evidence-based strategies and data-driven decision-making and context. When we think about the activities and the importance of those activities, it really provided participants with an increased understanding of aligned evidence-based strategies for implementation. And so what you see on the slide essentially are REL resources across our regional educational laboratory, including, as you'll see, the infographic that we shared at the beginning, that really does have evidence-based strategies. And so as part of our activity, we had our partners to actually map what they were doing in terms of their existing initiatives, along with the evidence-based strategies that were actually being demonstrated in the work provided here. In addition to that, we talked about the data that's being used, as well as how they were aligned in terms of their initiatives and implementation for their individual strategic plans individually as well as collectively. So my partner will talk a little bit more about what they've learned in the context of the work that we've been doing for our partnership. You're muted.
Thank you. Really and truly, the great thing about this partnership is that it has really been a collaborative effort, and it's been mutually beneficial. So we've been able to come together and utilize expertise from Rail Southeast and also our own in-house expertise in order to be able to craft something that is truly working for us. So when we think about just our strategic plan, it's well at Jackson State University, it's well aligned with what we've been doing with Rail Southeast. Part of our focus in our strategic plan was really to focus in on student success, academic provenance, and research excellence. And the activities that we've done have really helped us focus in on recruiting a diverse student population and identifying students and strategies that can be more effective for us, and also in just being able to truly support our students as they progress through that teacher education pipeline. So this work for us has been really and truly exciting. So when we talk about some of those existing initiatives that we have and what we've learned as we've worked our way through this process, it's been truly, truly great. So the process assists us in identifying, targeting, and developing kind of structured pathways for our students. And really, in some instances, we were reminded of work that we've done in the past that we kind of let fall by the wayside. And two of those instances really are our community college recruitment efforts. At one point in time, we had a really strong relationship with community colleges around the state, and we showed up at recruitment events and so forth. But over the years, it had kind of died down for us. And having just being in the room and having these conversations reminded us we need to, shift our focus back and start back doing some of the things that we were doing in the past with those bodies. And also, we have a really strong STEM program here at Jackson State University, and they bring in students every summer for a summer bridge program. And again, in the past, we had some really strong recruitment efforts with those students, and it had just kind of died off over the years. So being able to just be reminded of things that we've done in the past that work very well, and be able to just bring them back to the future is something that's been really beneficial for us in terms of this process. And also speaking through the process with the other institutions, the HBCUs, Mississippi Department of Education, our school district partners, Jackson Public Schools and Vicksburg Warren School District, we were able to, again, begin talk through all the different alternatives out there and looking at paid internships and tutoring opportunities for our students and working and talking through apprenticeship programs and so forth. So really being able to have everything on the table at one time with the major players in place has been something that was really, really great and truly beneficial. And even from those talks, we were able to identify additional partners, uh, began working with, kind of thinking outside the box. We began working with museums and state agencies to bring in additional resources. And one of the things that came out of this in terms of uh, the preparation of junior faculty and building capacity of junior faculty, we came up with what we call Training Thursdays initiative, where our senior faculty uh, work with junior faculty. We also have Rail Southeast that comes in periodically to work with junior faculty. And we have stakeholders from across the state come in and have sessions where we all work together to build that research capacity so that we can get uh, funded research to look at this teacher pipeline and make sure that our junior faculty are really and truly engaged in this process. And that's something that's been really and truly exciting for us. And, and we didn't just limit that to the junior faculty. We also focus in on our students and building their capacity with what we refer to as Teaching Tuesday. So 3 Tuesdays a month, again, we have stakeholders come in and they provide, free professional development sessions with our students to just make sure that they have all the support and they're exposed to, culturally responsive practices, are they are aware of all the internship and opportunities that are out there for those students. So again, just in terms of us being able to sit down at the table, it's been really great being able to partner and be a part of this process.
Thank you. So what does success look like moving forward? You've heard about our great successes around collaboration, both across our partnering entities as well as with our JSU partners and other HBCUs in particular. What we've talked about really, as you've heard, it has built the foundation for the work moving forward. And looking ahead, we really want to build upon that momentum, offering additional services and sessions that are going to support both institutions and system level change. We'd like to continue to focus on collaborative research designs, but we also want to know, and as highlighted, this really has sparked an interest, a collective interest in how we engage in research to move the needle forward as it relates to the teacher pipeline and teacher recruitment initiatives. Last but not least, with that being said, though, the ultimate long-term outcome is to have our partners report progress in making policy and practice changes to support the state's goal in reducing teacher vacancies and our goal into supporting a more diverse workforce utilizing culturally responsive strategies to improve student outcomes in both the K-12 and the post-secondary setting. Thank you.
Fantastic. Latera, Tony, thank you so much for sharing that important work. Really exciting to hear about your efforts around the teacher pipeline and the collaboration with post-secondary. Really, really exciting work. And I think we're all really going to be interested to see what comes out of the next steps you just shared. So thank you so much for sharing. So our next presenter, Jackie Peng, is going to talk a little bit about the work in REL Mid-Atlantic. Great to have her on deck today. And Jackie, why don't you take it away?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh, and good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Jackie Peng. I'm joining you from my home state of Maryland on behalf of REL Mid-Atlantic to talk to you about the work that the REL has been doing with the New Jersey Department of Education. And before I begin, just want to shout out our NJDOE partners who we've been working with for the last several years, who have really been champions of this work. And have been just amazing partners to work with. So you heard Tony and Latara speak just a few minutes ago about the educator pipeline, right? And bringing folks into the educator pipeline. And so what I'm going to be talking about are efforts to diversify New Jersey's educator workforce with a particular focus on hiring and selection. So once folks are already into the pipeline, so to speak, how then are they actually hired at the district level? And so our partnership in New Jersey really was rooted in two goals that guided our technical assistance, coaching, and support. The first was NJDOE's goal to, by 2025, have all students, regardless of race, have access to high quality, culturally responsive early career teachers who reflect the race and ethnicity of the present K-12 population. And I'll be talking in just a moment about kind of what that looks like in New Jersey, which we oftentimes think of as a very diverse state, and it certainly is in terms of its student body. The second goal was to advance NJDOE's mission and build district capacity through a focus specifically on hiring and selection. So just want to give you a bit of background on the need for this work in New Jersey in particular. There are over 121,000 students in New Jersey who see zero teachers of color or zero teachers who reflect their own racial background. And there are, zero non-white teachers in 1 in 5 New Jersey school districts as of the 2017 school year. So as a state, New Jersey really had its work cut out for it. And so that's where we came in terms of working alongside them to figure out how to focus on hiring and selection in an attempt to diversify their educator population. So we had 10 school districts from 10 different New Jersey counties sign on to engage in a 6-part coaching series. Participating districts came from all over the state and were comprised of urban as well as suburban and a handful of more rural school districts. And they had different levels of staff and student diversity. So for example, one of our districts, Maple Shade School District in Burlington County, had 224 professional staff, 96.9% of whom are white, compared to a non-white student population of just over 45%. Another one of our participants, Penns Grove, Carneys Point in Salem County, had a professional staff that was 82.9% white and a non-white student population of just over 74%. Most districts who attended did attend as a team that included a combination of school-based staff, district leaders, including those who oversaw the hiring and selection process. And because of the really highly collaborative nature of the coaching initiative, which I'll speak to in just a moment, one of the things we found was that districts that did attend with a team were able to get more out of the sessions and really able to operationalize the learning more effectively. So in terms of what the coaching series actually included or what it looked like, as I mentioned earlier, there were 6 different sessions. In our initial session called Starting Where We Are, this is where we set the context for NJDOE's focus on hiring and selection by examining some of the data that we shared earlier, as well as setting up a context for why this work is important in a broad sense. So one of the things we did in this initial session was to talk about and form mutual understanding around concepts and terms like racial equity, culturally responsive pedagogy, and implicit bias. And this was really important, right, to develop this shared meaning and to frankly establish a level of comfort around some terms that have become very culturally and politically loaded. We found that that was an important first step to addressing some of the barriers to educator diversity that exist across the workforce pipeline, but particularly when it comes to hiring and selection. In one of our other sessions, taking a closer look, this is where we talked about the continuous improvement cycle and led districts through a process of analyzing their own workforce data in order to identify parts of the hiring funnel that created barriers or chokes in the process for hiring educators of color. So you can see that represented here on your screen, that hiring funnel. And this was really an important step to have districts do some root cause analysis using their context specific data, right? So their local data. In one of our other sessions, we use a self-assessment tool to engage in a root cause analysis process, which then set the context for the basis of an increasing educator diversity action plan, which each participating district completed at the end of the coaching series. It was really important to do that root cause analysis in that third session because we wanted to make sure that the plans that ultimately districts were going to be creating were grounded in their local data, right? And that were really tied to that root cause analysis. And then in our last two sessions, 5 and 6, this is where districts finalized vision statements, a theory of action, and actually developed and received feedback on their increasing educator diversity action plans. So in terms of some of the things that we learned throughout this process and working with districts, one of the things we learned is that there's a lot of confusion about, for example, the legality of asking for and using applicant demographic data, particularly data around race and ethnicity, in the service of statewide goals to increase diversity. And so human resource professionals and those involved in the hiring and selection process really needed not only some information about the legality of some of those things, but also, frankly, how to talk about race and implicit bias and educator diversity, which are topics that can be quite sensitive and ones that, not everyone may be comfortable addressing or have a lot of experience in terms of communicating that to their interest holders, why there was a focus on this work. Some of the other things that we've learned throughout this coaching series are that district plans to increase educator diversity are really only as good as a few things. So first of all, the data and the root cause analysis used to inform the plan. So it's really essential, it was really essential that districts engaged in a root cause analysis using their local data. We know that there are a variety of research-backed and research-based strategies and interventions that districts can use, right? There's different levers, lots of different levers that folks can pull. But ultimately, you need to do ones and implement things that make sense for your particular district based on your local data. The other thing that we learned is that plans to increase educator diversity are also really dependent on the specificity of the data with regard to the hiring funnel. So for example, where do candidates of color enter and exit the process? And so having districts actually look at their data in relation to that hiring funnel and really be able to drill down with a degree of specificity around, how many applicants are we getting? How many are getting to the interview stage? How many are then being moved from the interview stage and actually into classrooms? And so one of the things that we learned was that there were some things that districts could be doing differently, for example, with regard to their interview processes at the district level. And then there were also, we were finding some real tensions that existed around the number of applicants that were even coming into the hiring funnel. And I think that that speaks to some of the work that Tony and Latara mentioned in the earlier presentation about how do we get folks into the pipeline. And then lastly, these plans are really only as good as the ability of district leaders to implement these interventions within their specific contexts. So one of the strategies that we often hear about, and encourage districts to do is to partner with historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions. That's something, again, that if you don't have a lot of HBCUs in your state, that might make less sense for you as a strategy, as opposed to what we encouraged. Ultimately, what many of our districts decided to do was to partner with local community colleges that had more diverse student populations and to form those types of connections and partnerships instead. So in terms of what's next for this work, we have just started the other week a Train the Trainers coaching series. So we have some educators who are working at the state level who have signed on to further this work across the state and to train additional districts in the state of New Jersey to try to scale the impact of this work. We're also right now conducting an implementation study and have begun doing some early data analysis to try to understand how districts who participated in the coaching series implemented what they learned and how that has hopefully made a difference in terms of the number of teachers of color who are being hired into districts. So thank you for your time today and look forward to talking with you more in the Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jackie. It was great to hear about the hiring funnel. I was really excited to hear about using local data to drill down into that root cause analysis to help increase educator diversity. And I'm really excited to hear about what you all find with that implementation study that's next on the agenda. So thank you so much for taking time to share that with us. Really appreciate it. So our next presenter, so we're going to hear from Rel Central, Emma Espel Villarreal on some work here in Colorado, focused on thinking about, well, actually, why don't I just turn it over to Emma to share her work here in the Colorado area.
Thanks so much, Josh. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here to talk about our partnership in Rel Central that's been focused on increasing teacher diversity in Colorado. And I also want to acknowledge my Rel Central colleague who's helped lead the work, Stephen Meyer, who's also on the call today. This partnership is focused on increasing the number of teachers of color in Colorado. And similar to some other states, it focuses on addressing the disparity between the percentage of teachers of color in the state and the students that they're serving. This focus of the partnership responds to the needs of our primary partners, who include the Colorado Departments of Education and the Colorado Department of Higher Education. When we began this work, 87% of Colorado teachers were white, compared to just over half of students. This disparity has improved slightly over time, but there's still a large disparity, and our partners want to address it. So the Teacher Diversity in Colorado Partnership seeks to reduce the gap between the racial and ethnic composition of the teacher workforce and the student population, so that students are more likely to have teachers throughout their education that represent their own racial and ethnic backgrounds. We hope to accomplish this goal in part by improving recruitment and retention of teachers of color. On the way, our projects are designed to support partners in using data to reach these outcomes. The projects as part of this partnership to date have included support for partners to understand factors that influence teachers of color in their decisions to stay, leave, or move from positions, as well as 2 webinars on this topic that I'll talk about next. So just briefly about these 2 webinars that we hosted. They happened in early 2023, and they're available online if you're interested. The first focused on supporting human resources professionals in local education agencies, those who are responsible for recruiting and hiring teachers. It featured a discussion of the benefits of a diverse teacher workforce and a summary of trends in teacher diversity in Colorado as well as nationwide. And it really highlighted that discrepancy I already mentioned, and that has been mentioned by my colleagues on this call, between the racial and ethnic diversity of the teaching and student populations. During that webinar, we then heard from Carolyn Haug at the Colorado Department of Education. She discussed the strategic plans, policies, and initiatives in Colorado that are focused on this topic and have been a priority over the past few years. And Colorado has prioritized this workforce diversity issue, but also continues to see the disparity between the student and teaching population. Then during the webinar, Rel Central shared examples of research-based policies and practices on this topic. So examples included research-based on alternative and residency models, activities related to exposing high school students to teaching, and recruitment through word of mouth, financial aid, and local communities. And then lastly, we heard some really rich presentations from representatives of 2 educator preparation programs in Colorado who shared what they are doing to increase teacher diversity. Specifically, the Center for Urban Education at the University of Northern Colorado described their Grow Your Own educator preparation program. Program participants, who were primarily paraprofessionals, work in schools in the morning and have the opportunity to take classes at kind of different times, including afternoon, evening, and weekends. The university seeks to recruit people of color to serve as faculty members and mentors. They use culturally responsive teaching strategies, and they provide wraparound support for students as they get field-based experience. And then the other program that was described on the webinar was the Teacher Apprenticeship Program, also for paraprofessionals. And it was a partnership between the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs and Calhoun School District, which is nearby. But they also were able to expand it and partner with 8 additional rural districts. So really trying to address some of the needs in rural areas in Colorado. The second webinar was designed to bring in teacher voice, which has been really a strong theme throughout our entire partnership and projects. A panel of 5 teachers from across the state of Colorado was asked about how they got into the profession, what sorts of positions they had, and their experiences in those positions, as well as factors affecting their decisions to join the teaching profession and stay in it. Panel members, we had a really rich panel ranging from novice to veteran teachers with decades of experience. It also included those who've chosen to remain in the profession, as well as some who were considering leaving. And I'd also like to note one of our panelists was Janet Damon, who is Colorado's 2025 Teacher of the Year. Participants shared their personal stories about positive and negative experiences in their own education that led them to the teaching profession. They also identified common themes such as experiencing isolation in the workplace and the importance of creating affinity groups and safe spaces. It was a really rich and interesting discussion that informed some of our future work. And you can see a sample quote on the slide. One of the panelists said, "There wasn't representation in my school as a child. The only people I saw of color who were working at the school typically worked as custodial services or in the kitchen. The main thing that keeps me going is being a positive role model." So it was really important for this partnership to include the teacher voice in their thinking about how to best diversify the teaching workforce. The next piece I want to describe is the partnership project focused on providing support to the state and then eventually the local education agencies. In particular, this project was designed to inform partners' understanding of why teachers of color were choosing to leave or stay, and increase partners' capacity to develop and use data collection tools, and then also to ultimately support the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. So we had a kind of a great process where we were able to work with partners to end up developing surveys that could be administered statewide. And the process is outlined on the slide for you. It's kind of wordy, so I'll try to summarize it. First, we designed interview and focus group protocols and co-conducted 6 focus groups with volunteer teachers across the state who were interested in participating. We then worked with partners to strategically plan how to use these data to inform recruitment and retention. In particular, we worked with the partners and understood that the results from just 6 focus groups would not necessarily be generalizable to teachers across the state, but could inform sort of a framework to think about how do we really understand recruitment and retention of teachers, and particularly teachers of color. So the focus groups and a literature scan were used to come up with this framework of categories related to recruitment and retention. And ultimately, those resources led to the design of a survey that addressed each of the categories in that framework. And the survey was incorporated into a biannual survey. So Colorado administers its survey to all teachers across the state called the Teaching and Learning Conditions in Colorado Survey. And this new survey piece we called the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Survey, TRR, and it was administered as an add-on to the TLCC, the Teaching and Learning Conditions Colorado. Schools get their own results back if more than half of their teachers respond. So it's a really great vehicle to be able to get the word out. And there was good participation this year as well. They get at least half of teachers responding. So the teacher recruitment and retention survey ultimately included 5 primary categories to address the question of our partners, which is what factors are related to teacher and recruitment and retention, particularly for teachers of color. The categories on the survey are summarized for you here. Some may be related to recruitment and retention for all teachers, but they were identified because they seemed particularly relevant for teachers of color. And the categories include motivation, preparation, experiences, and pre-service pathways. So really trying to get to the root of what brings teachers into the profession and trying to capitalize that on with any understanding of future, programs and decisions that local agencies might make. Another category was effective leadership. So really making sure that teachers are able to trust in, respect, and feel supported by their school and district administration. Faculty network was really another category that was important, that included collaborative and relationship support and touches on that feelings of isolation. I think in the that brings it back to the webinar focus. Some of the teachers were identifying feeling supported in their community as a really important factor in their decisions to stay or leave. That's something we heard throughout the focus groups and within the literature scan. So it was brought up as one of the categories here. Then there were also community connections kind of beyond the faculty network. So opportunities to engage with the community, the families, and the school beyond just the faculty, and really making sure that there's collaborative and relationship support. Community and family engagement. And then finally, respect for the profession related to societal expectations, making sure that educators feel like their time and autonomy and resources are protected and that they're treated well. The survey was administered in early 2024. There were nearly 28,000 respondents to the teacher recruitment and retention survey, which was kind of a subset of those who responded to the overall TLCC survey that goes out to all educators, and this piece was focused on teachers. REL Central also prepared guidance to help its Colorado partners analyze their results using our code and being able to describe the findings, including disaggregating findings by race and ethnicity according to each of the primary categories that I just went through. So Colorado Department of Education used this guidance to generate a report. There's a link here. You can see the kind of screenshot of the report, and it includes the state's first findings based on large-scale educator retention perception data for individual race and ethnic groups. This report was released at the end of July. So the findings in the report suggest that the key takeaways here, teachers of color demonstrated slightly higher levels of satisfaction and enthusiasm for teaching as compared to white teachers. And that finding was statistically significant, reported by Colorado Department of Education. And satisfaction and enthusiasm also predicted whether or not teachers intended to continue teaching. They also found overall that only 38% of teachers had indicated that their role models when they were a student also included teachers of color. That sort of speaks to some of the disparity between the student and the teacher representation. And we also saw that teachers of color were 1.5 times more likely to report having a teacher of color as a role model when they were a student compared to white teachers. Other significant predictors of the intent to continue teaching included feelings that school leadership were working to build trust among staff. The evaluation process provides teachers with actionable feedback for improvement. That was an important predictor of intent to continue teaching. And that teachers feel they have an adequate level of influence on school decisions. So making sure that their voices are heard. The state plans to use what it learned to help schools and districts as they work to recruit and retain more educators of color. And they also plan to use results to assess the efficacy of current educator workforce programs. As I mentioned, there's a few initiatives going on, so they're able to use these data to think about where to focus their efforts, and also to ultimately create more equitable and inclusive pipelines into the profession. The next project in this partnership is upcoming, kind of getting kicked off now, And it focuses on grow your own programs in Colorado, which Colorado and others across the nation really recognize as a strategy for helping to diversify the teaching profession and ensuring that student population and the teacher population are kind of more similar to one another too. There are many grow your own programs in place throughout the state designed to allow districts and schools to recruit, prepare, and place community members as educators in local schools. In Colorado, like many places, there's no particular single approach or model, but rather a collection of strategies that are locally determined by districts and other local entities. And they've adopted these strategies based on their needs and in partnership often with educator preparation programs. So far, the state has not provided guidance for grow your own programs, and there's also not really good information about these programs that's consistently collected. For example, about their components, their outcomes, or their, lessons learned from them. So our partnership members at the Colorado Department of Ed and Department of Higher Ed have expressed interest in better understanding the extent to which grow your own program strategies are research informed, understanding the role of local context in shaping how grow your own programs in Colorado are designed and operated, whether local education agencies have seen evidence of successes, and also describing the challenges that programs have faced that could inform practical guidance to districts in developing or implementing grow your own programs. So through the 4 activities listed on this slide, REL Central and partnership members plan to work together to address this need through summarizing research-informed strategies, learning from programs, developing a how-to guide, and ultimately developing a workshop for districts and others who are seeking to use grow your own programs to help diversify the teaching workforce. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm really happy to be here. It's great to hear from our colleagues, and I will pass it on to our next presenter.
Thank you so much, Emma. It was great to hear about that, those 2 webinars, particularly the one that included Teacher Voice. So lots of good insights there, and really exciting to hear about that TRR addition survey to the existing survey and just the importance that role models play in whether or not a teacher decides to stay or leave the profession. And I think we'll all be excited to hear about the next steps related to those grow your own projects. So Emma, thank you so much for sharing that work with us. We really appreciate it. Next, we're going to be hearing from REL Midwest, and I'm happy to present our next speaker, Tammy Kazi Tone, who will be sharing a little bit about the work again in REL Midwest.
I'm so pleased to be with you. My name is Tammy Kazi Konate, and I'm representing the REL Midwest. Our work today, the work that we'll share, is supporting inclusive and diverse educator environments. And this work grew out of a challenge that we saw persisting across the state of Minnesota. The persistency had to do with patterns of race-based gaps in education outcomes, test scores, graduation rates, college enrollment, college completion. And the greatest gaps existed between white students and American Native students. Just to give you a bit of context, in 2020, around the time we started the project, only 4% of the state's teachers identified as people of color, compared to 34% of students. And so a few years before that, in 2017-18, 38% of Minnesota's school districts employed no teachers of color. And when we look at the proportion of teachers of color in another 36% of districts, we saw that only 6% were employed. So we understood from this that there were some challenges that we might be able to address. We thought that attracting and retaining diverse educators could contribute to closing some of these gaps. We also realized that there were a lack of concrete guidance, resources, and other possibilities to address the possibility for closing the gaps through creating working conditions to foster more inclusive and supportive climates. As such, our primary objective then was to develop a pilot intervention to improve working conditions and retain teachers of color and Indigenous teachers. And so we wanted to implement the professional learning approach that we were designing in pilot schools, revise, adapt, and eventually bring it to scale as a professional learning approach to be used across many other schools. Before we go to the next slide, however, I'll just start to say a bit about what we actually did. So in terms of what we've done, we set out over the course of 2 years to provide a range of supports. You'll see here that our approach dealt with cultural proficiency training for all staff. It also dealt with leadership coaching for leadership in the school, including the principal and the leadership team, affinity groups for educators of color and Indigenous educators, in which those groups were able to really work to think about belonging, emotional safety, identity, what professional concerns they found unique to them, how to prepare for mixed group dialogue, and what innovations were of interest to them in enhancing a more inclusive school community and environment. We also looked at um, affinity groups. I'm sorry, mentor coaching. In terms of mentor coaching, we wanted to really advance opportunities for teachers of color and Indigenous teachers who often have their pedagogy kind of placed to the side as they are engaged as cultural custodians and disciplinarians. And so this gave them an opportunity to really dig into standards for mentoring, to think about the sorts of mentoring experiences they had and those they desired, to frame out supports for improving mentoring experiences, particularly for educators of color and Indigenous educators. Overall, we offered more than 24 hours of coaching and training support across the schooling environment. We can go to the next slide. So as we did so, our approach, as I mentioned, had a number of facets. We set out to explore. You'll see here that we found it really very important to be able to, in our need sensing approach, and as we work through co-designing, communicate effectively, understand the issues that underpinned the existing climate and the gaps that grew out of that, customize training and coaching, and engage local shareholders so that we drew on the experts in the locale to support all of the work that we did. And that work was co-designed, which was a very important part of it. As we prepared the work, we made sure that our internal team was composed of professionals and experts who had positionality and the understanding and the deep bench to really conduct the work in a way that would honor the social and historical political context that we entered into. We also wanted to make sure to leverage the district level and REL level support for professional learning. In the third facet of our work, we set out to schedule and deliver training and coaching that was really sensitive to the context in which we operated, that led with humanity, and that invited ways to discover and learn more about the cultural assets of the communities in which we operated. And finally, we wanted to create structures that would stay with the teams long after we left so that their sustained growth would continue, their sustained transformation would be a natural outcome of that work. As we move into now thinking about what we learned from this experience, you'll recall that we did set out to pilot first and to refine the work. So when we interviewed and were able to gather data from a range of different sources, we learned that there were um, two basic components: cultural proficiency training and leadership coaching, where sessions gave us this valuable information about what needed to happen. The session materials, for example, we learned had to be easily digestible to a range of different educators with a range of different needs. We also learned that the in-person sessions, much of the work took place virtually, having taken place in the context of COVID. And so we learned that the few in-person sessions that we were able to have carried a lot of weight. We were able to build rapport, establish communication flows, and really set the stage for the work. And more of those were desired. In terms of getting into the flow of discussions, as we met virtually and in person, it took time. The content was at times challenging and very complex, and folks needed to develop a sense of trust to be able to share. And so we learned from this set of experiences how to temper the work, pace it a little bit differently, create opportunities for folks to engage in those intimate conversations, maybe through breakout and other ways, even in writing. And then finally, we learned that sessions had to be of broad relevance to participants' needs. Some participants were very accelerated in terms of the knowledge base they shared, and others were beginning. And so we needed to find a nice sweet spot so every participant would be able to benefit. As we moved into year two, having adapted our resources and materials and approach from what we learned in year one, we were able to get not only guidance from our partners about how to do the work, but we came to understand what they were getting from the work in terms of benefits accrued. And so 93% of school level staff out of an N of 30 felt that they were better able to implement culturally responsive practices and integrate inclusive and cultural norms that were asset based. We also saw that 86% of the affinity group members interviewed said that they were able to strengthen their relationships with one another. 100% of the mentor coaching group had a greater capacity to implement inclusive and culturally responsive practices to mentor new teachers. 100% had greater capacity to identify and implement change for culturally inclusive school environments. And of the leaders, that same thing. They were able to change the environment and use culturally responsive practices and the information that grew out of that to inform the decisions they were making at the school level. You'll see on the next slide, we really thought it important to integrate the voices of the folks. And this is why we shared the results of the surveys. And also, we wanted to share this quote from the superintendent at Red Lake School District. In this school district, we learned what you see here, that families, students, communities, all were able to gain a better sense of cultural awareness and humility. I want to say this is really important. As we were moving through the presentation, we skipped over the second slide a bit. It was we moved right into the third slide. But I'll just say of the second slide, we had the good fortune to work with two school districts, one St. Louis Park Public Schools in Minnesota. And in that school district, we worked with teachers who were really phenomenal educators and leaders. And in that in that context, what we found most interesting was that as we entered the work, we looked at diversity within the school, in the schooling context, as being rather dichotomous. That's what the literature and research was telling us. But in that school context, we found that there were teachers representing 39 different countries. And at one point, it was assumed that many of them would take part in the affinity group for educators of color. As we interviewed them and worked with them, we discovered their affinity was not race or ethnicity, but language. They were native speakers of Spanish from 39 different countries. The other thing we found in the second school district, Red Lake Public Schools, was that this school had which is on one of only 2 closed reservations in the nation. This school had a population of students 100% American natives. 30% of the teachers, however, were American natives. And so when we imagined that the major affinity would be for the American native teachers, we discovered that it was instead for teachers who were being recruited from the Philippines so that they would have the sense of belonging and inclusion. And so my point in deviating a bit from this our format here is just to circle back to share this importance of supporting inclusive and diverse educator experiences and how it requires of us that we suspend what we think we know and we really hear from the individuals in the field, come to appreciate their particular circumstances, context, history, and politics so that we become better thought partners and are able to move the work in a positive direction. In the next slide, there is a blog that is available to you that blends SIDE with Red Lake Elementary Complex PK2 school vision. And it celebrates this two-way learning. This is the final school district where we worked, and we were able to develop a blog grounded in their voice, their experiences, their contributions, reviewed, vetted, and finalized by them. And so, as we support educators across the continuum to create more wholesome and inviting context for great folks to do great work, it really is important that we invite their voices, we honor their experiences, and we meet them where they are in terms of support. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tammy. It was really great to hear about the co-designed work you all did, employing those, or I should say, leveraging those local experts, and really kind of tying back to cultural assets. And I like what you mentioned about suspending what we know or what we think we know to move the work forward. Really exciting to hear about the work in both Red Lake and in St. Louis Park. So really appreciate you taking time to share that with us, and we'll be excited to hear about the next steps. So. Greatly appreciated. So now I think we can move into our Q&A session. So you've heard from all of our presenters, all of the great work they've been executing over this cycle of the REL contract. And so if you would, I believe, type your questions in and we can direct those to the individual panelists. But I think this will also give us a chance to get some crosstalk going about related work across the REL region for folks who may have a connection that they didn't quite have time to talk about during their presentation, but would love to hear your thoughts, your questions, and we can engage the presenters here in our next segment. Let's see. Okay, I think I've got a couple of questions here. Can you say more about what you found was needed to help community college recruits transition successfully into the teaching prep program at Jackson State? Can you speak specifically to transfer credit, acceptance, financial aid, mindset adaptations, and logistics? So I think that would be for Tony and Latera.
Yes. Thank you for the question. I think for us, it would focus more so on mindset adaptations and logistics. The great thing about our relationship in the College of Education and our community colleges across the state of Mississippi is that we already have agreements set up with the community college for accepting coursework in the field of education. So that transition in terms of the coursework for students coming from community colleges into education is fairly simple and straightforward. But the mindset adaptation was what we really had to work on, again, from our end and the community colleges. For us, we'd gone through a number of different leadership transitions. And again, some of the things that we were doing early on, we no longer had done just because of that inconsistency. So it was just really a matter of us reconnecting with faculty and staff at the community colleges, starting back, sitting down at the tables and talking about their needs. So from that, we were able to come up with some proposals that we partnered together for some grant funding and so forth, and just actually talked about things, such as practice preparation practices going on at the community colleges, and offered support on our end with them in order to make sure that the students are not only informed about what needs to occur once they transition into a college of education, but to make sure that they started doing these steps in order to prepare for that, such as taking the practice core licensure exam early, or where to go for resources, or joining our students at practice preparation sessions on our campus. So for us, it was mostly centered around the whole mindset, and just really making sure we're getting back to the practices that we had been doing in the past.
Great, thank you for that response there. And I think actually this next question is still for Latera and Tony. I'm interested to hear about the crosswalk used in Mississippi and how it guided the work.
So the crosswalk was essential in terms of what efforts and where we would direct our efforts in terms of focus. So for example, when we identified, I noted that one of the things we recognized in the crosswalk, that the initiatives were aligned as it related to recruitment efforts and initiatives specifically for MDE and one of the districts. And so again, what we recognized, that there were also initiatives that were also happening at JSU that were very similar in context. And so what the crosswalk did for us, it's helped us to become more focused and have the institutions as well as the district and the MDE in particular think about how they could collectively do that work and how they might leverage the work that they were doing. And so that crosswalk has served as a major foundation for not only the actual focus of the work, but also helping them to understand where we were going as it related to strategic policies, strategic practices around the work. And so that crosswalk really has been the foundation for the work that we're doing as a partnership as a whole, even from dissemination, just simple strategies. So for example, we found that at MDE and at Vicksburg Warren, there were some initiatives around Grow Your Own. Well, JSU also had Grow Your Own initiatives. And so again, taking that crosswalk to really be very strategic about where the institutions, the district and the state would go to leverage those opportunities.
Yeah, and I'll also add that going through this process with the crosswalk while we were implementing our own Grow Your Own program was something that was really beneficial. And I think that we have a really unique Grow Your Own program that's a partnership between Jackson State University, Mississippi Department of Education, and Jackson Public School District, known as Jackson Middle College. It's a dual enrollment program where high school juniors and seniors enroll as full-time students here at Jackson State. This is what makes this dual enrollment unique. They're enrolled as full-time students at Jackson State. They take their classes on campus here at Jackson State University. And we have support staff from the school district housed in our college to kind of support them, that work along with college liaison to help them through that process. So just being able to, talk about the strategies while we were actually implementing strategies was very beneficial to us on the recruitment end. One of the things that we were able to do was, look, we sent college faculty out with actual Jackson Public School staff into all of the high schools in order to recruit students into the program. So they could not only talk to, the JPS staff, but they could ask faculty members questions and build those relationships and connections. We also sent college admissions officers out to the high schools for those students who were interested, and signed them up right there on the spot at their high schools. We developed a summer transition program to make sure that they were prepared once they got to the college in order to begin college coursework in the fall. And and also, we thought through the whole culturally responsive practices and teaching also, and partnered with Southern Initiative Algebra Project to come in and provide professional development, because this program is specifically designed to train math teachers to go back into the Jackson Public School District and teach in their high school classroom. So we're into our second year. We have 30 students in that program that are again going to go back into a school district and become math teachers, and we're really excited about it. And all of this is kind of work together to make this work.
Great, thank you so much for that answer, Latera and Tony. This, I think, is a question that's just for any of the panelists, and I feel like we love to get these types of questions, but really appreciate the information. It would be amazing to have REL support in this work. Any hints on the range of costs to have partnerships with RELs? And I'll say just as kind of a quick note, this is all free to you. So the REL system is designed to meet the needs of partners, of care holders, of individuals within the region. And so all of our work emerges from the state, from the local education agencies, from the state education agencies. I think the partnership here that Latera and Tony have been talking about really helps encapsulate the type of partnership and the directive really that the RELs have. But I'll just state that there isn't any cost to you outside of, well, there's time, shared interest, and so generally speaking, not a monetary cost, but love to hear the other panelists share a little bit about their processes for engaging folks in new work. I don't know what region you're coming from, but again, this is all kind of grassroots level and free to you within kind of the bounds of the REL program.
And Josh, I can jump in. I've been chatting with Colleen on the side, so we will connect her to the REL Northwest team after the webinar today.
Oh, great. Okay. Perfect. So that, yeah, and that's just kind of a high level note that, again, these services are open to you and really, again, targeted at your needs, at your specific requests. So I think that's part of the component that makes the RELs really special.
Josh, may I add something to that really quickly?
Yes, please.
There's also a large degree of cross-REL collaboration. So if you heard something on today's panel and you think, oh, I'd really be interested in learning more about how to do that in my region, but you heard that information presented from a presenter from a different region, we work together quite collaboratively. And so you should just reach out to, your local REL or the REL for your region, and we're able to, do a lot of work. So just wanted to add that.
Yes. Great point, Jackie. I also think that can be a real strong suit of the RELs. The cross collaboration can be huge for sure. Next, I think this is to any of the panelists. How does the teacher pipeline challenge look different for rural districts in particular?
So this is Tammy. We found that the pipeline challenge looked different in rural communities for a number of reasons. As we tried to think about ways to offer professional development experiences in person or virtually, time became a challenge. So in rural communities where teachers had to travel great distances after school, they were much less willing and able to take part in professional learning that was not really customized within the time that they had. And as you can imagine, professional learning during the school day is something that needs to be planned substantially in advance. And so that is one of the learnings that we took away, to have early planning to try to integrate professional learning experiences into existing timeframes for professional development, and also to try to seek support. So through the co-design process that I talked about earlier in our side project, we were able to get support within the school district for teachers who stayed after school so that they were compensated for their investment. And we were also able to provide co-development support through the REL for those teachers who were a part of designing the intervention and took lots of time, invested so much of themselves and their wisdom.
I could add one note as well that we didn't present on today, but for a number of REL Central states, we're working on projects to support teacher apprenticeship programs. I think those have been a good benefit for rural districts where they have paraprofessionals, folks in the community that would like to be in education, but perhaps they weren't able to finish their post-secondary work. Perhaps they need some additional support. And so there are several programs that offer incentives, such as the district sort of helping the educators pay for that post-secondary education, pay to finish, but also be educators that have a mentor as they're kind of gaining their full teaching license. And so that's been one, I think, additional lever that's helped where you might have a remote community. It might be hard to connect folks to move to that location. And so that's also been coupled with online education. So I think to Tammy's point, knowing that it's really hard for folks to travel, particularly if you're trying to finish any sort of post-secondary work at an actual physical location, some of these states have implemented these programs where that can be done online, and then you can teach during the day. I think a challenge there is sometimes that's a bit overwhelming, but another lever possibly to help connect folks in rural communities where you do have interest, but they may have not traditionally had access to a post-secondary opportunity, or there may have been a financial barrier. Next question. Oh, sorry. Did
I was just going to add one other thing. What you've said about rural areas tracks with what we're hearing too and what we've seen. One other piece that seems to kind of come up consistently is just that in rural districts where staff tend to have to wear a lot of different hats, it can be challenging to think about how to prioritize recruitment and retention of a diverse educator workforce, and among other responsibilities as well, even though the desire is there, trying to kind of find the time and resources. So it seems like there is an interest in kind of understanding what sort of supports would be in place to help kind of facilitate and make that barrier either in terms of reducing time or increasing knowledge and understanding of the best way to kind of go, or in local context, what can be a good way to go through the recruitment and retention of teachers. I think that's something that we hear kind of more commonly in the smaller or rural districts, is that multiple hats piece of it that is important to think about when supporting districts who are in that context.
Yes, great points. So I'll move us on to the next question because we do have a few more to get through. What role did local or national politics play in the work? Was this a barrier? Was it a benefit? How did that work? And I think that's to anybody on the call.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah, so what role did local or national political discussions play into the work? Was that a barrier? Was it a benefit? Maybe did it have an impact at all? Yeah.
I can share. I think there are several instances where kind of what's playing out at the national level can be, or even at the local level, can be a barrier. I'm thinking particularly of, trying to diversify the educator workforce. I think that we are unfortunately in a moment when entering the education profession, particularly in a K-12 context, I think has become in some ways a less attractive option for a lot of folks. And so I do think that there's a lot of work to be done at the state and district level to try to work against that. In our partnership in particular, one of the things that we focused on quite a bit initially in the coaching series, as I spoke to, was really working with folks who were involved in the hiring and selection process to just get comfortable using some of these terms, like implicit bias or, you know, race, right? What is ethnicity? What do these terms mean even? And how do you communicate that to your staff or to interest holders in your district? And really articulate and lead conversations about why this work or why these initiatives are important. And so I think, you know, to some degree, it has been a barrier, but I think there are a lot of opportunities also for us to figure out how to get that messaging right.
I'll add that locally and nationally, we found that there were certain barriers politically and culturally that would have implications for sustainability of the work. And so at the local level, as shifts came about in leadership and decisions were made about having to let certain people go because of financial shifts, and also, you know, who would be moving up, who would be left behind. We saw some morale shift in terms of the intervention and how people were experiencing the intervention and the hopes and plans they have for advancing it. And so the focus became more on job security and less on how to support the climate in a way that would benefit educators and students. From a national context, we found that the politics nationally had implications for approaches that we were able to take to delivering the training and coaching, the language we were able to use or not, and how best to really address the needs of the individual communities within those constraints. And so, yes, there were implications locally and nationally.
Thanks for those responses. Let's see. So the next question, I do see a couple of notes about sharing the slide deck and maybe not being able to use the QR codes. I know we're going to make the deck available, so that should help. I don't know if there are any other tricks that folks could use other than going to the REL website. I think you could probably find them there, but just keep in mind we will share the recording and the deck. And so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to access those resources going forward. And happy to follow up with you afterwards too with a quick message. Okay, so a couple of other comments. Let's see, what do we know about the platforms districts use to collect and vet teacher applications? Some hiring software programs have been found to have biases, particularly for applicants of color. Is it clear what districts do to ensure people are not being screened out unfairly?
So this is Latera Ross Southeast. I can't specifically speak to the platforms that districts are using. What I can speak to, what's unique, I think, about the partnership that we have with Rail Southeast and our partners in Mississippi is that in the districts that we're partnering with, we actually have the personnel director who is a partner for our partnership. And so she is very much in tune to what we're doing. There's also some work across our comprehensive centers that's also illuminating what's using in terms what platforms are being used. So I'd like to say I can't speak specifically to like I said, the platform, but because we have the partner there, the director for personnel, I think that does lend itself as a benefit to us in the work that we're doing.
Great. And I did see another question about rural districts. I feel like maybe we'll hop to another one just because I feel like we might have been able to address that. But certainly follow up with us if you would like more details. Let's see. Thank you for the presentation. If you could only choose one thing to carry out in the future for your work on diversification of the educator workforce, what would it be?
I know this might sound intuitive. This is Laterra again, but it's partnerships. Particularly in the work that we do. We were very intentional about who we partner with and why we partner. Of course, it's our partners come to us. You know, we talk about the co-development. Tammy talked about how things are co-developed and being very intentional about those things. But particularly with the work that we're doing with our historically Black colleges and universities, there are many of these institutions are small institutions with less resources. And so if we're really going to move the needle, it's very important that we are partnering to expand our scope, our scale. So for me, it would certainly be partnerships.
I will echo that. I will say partnerships not just between the RELs and states and districts, but I think partnerships to the degree that RELs can help facilitate and broker partnerships between districts and SEAs, for example. So our project in New Jersey was through NJDOE, and then we were working on coaching districts. And one of the things that we found is that oftentimes, you know, the flow of communication and what folks are experiencing at the district level doesn't always, in all cases, make its way to the ears of folks at the SEA, and what, you know, individual EPPs are experiencing may not be fully understood by folks at the SEA level. So I think the RELs are able to be a partner in that work and help to, you know, facilitate those conversations between, you know, different interest holders at various levels.
That makes sense to me too, the partnerships piece, and I would maybe even extend it further to including teacher voice. That was something that we found to be particularly beneficial in the work that we were doing in REL Central. So including that as it kind of informing the partnerships that develop, but also informing some of the data collection activities. So really being able to have a well-rounded understanding through both qualitative teacher voice, but also then kind of being able to generalize it more by administering the teacher survey statewide. I think we're having the opportunity to really kind of triangulate what we're learning and have more kind of possibility for impactful decision making.
This is Tammy. I agree with everything that's been shared. And I would say what I would take away is how to prioritize the relationships, the voices and the perspectives that are shared by members of the partnership, and also to bring with us an asset focus. And so as we center our work in what they have already accomplished, what they're set up to accomplish, and what their personal and professional priorities are, I find that is a takeaway that the RELs have supported extremely well, so that communities are able to move toward an area of interest to them that means something specific to them, and they can see evidence of their growth even when we can't track it through the research immediately. They can share those nuances about changes happening within the midst of their work.
Fantastic. And I see we still have a number of questions, but I don't know that we'll be able to get to all of them, but I do know you can always contact us if you would like to follow up. I did see, for example, like Jackie, somebody's interested in the tool you use for the root cause analysis, several other questions about just next steps for everybody's work. So certainly follow up with the RELs you can do that on the REL website. But I just wanted to thank everybody for your time, for joining us today. You can always email me or Rick as well, and we can help redirect you to one of the RELs to get your question answered. There's a lot of questions in the chat, so I apologize we can't get to all of it, but I just want to thank everybody for being on deck today. Really great to hear the discussion and the work we're doing. Rick, anything else to, oh, and I do want to say there is a brief survey we hope you could take at the end of the webinar. That would really help us out if you wouldn't mind doing that. And trying to, let's see, is there anything else to share in closing?
Yes, let's see, Kirsten, if you wouldn't mind just, I think, going to the next slide where we do have our email address for people to reach out to us. And that's
Yes.
right. Go ahead,
So
Josh.
if you send that to us, we can kind of triage your questions to a specific individual, or if it makes sense, I can loop in multiple people to help answer your questions. So again, apologies on not being able to get through all of the questions. I'm really excited to see all the interest in the chat, and I just want to again thank everybody for your time and your willingness to share your great work.